What's up with the Pokemon storage system, from PCs to physical pastures to whatever the heck this is in the Let's Go games? In this video, I will overanalyze the PC system in Pokemon, talk about things I didn't even know existed, and then arbitrarily rank them on this whiteboard that I got on sale from Stables. You know, there's not a lot I can say about the Generation 1 Pokemon games that haven't already been set into oblivion since they came out all the way back in the 1900s. The PC system in red, blue, and yellow is identical to one another, with one slight exception with the Japanese versions. You see, normally the Gen 1 PC consists of 12 boxes which can hold 20 Pokemon each, but in the Japanese versions they only had 8 boxes but held 30 Pokemon. This works out to a max capacity of 240 Pokemon in both versions, but having 30 slots in a single box is way better than 20, especially because in the Game Boy era, you had to manually save to switch boxes, and if you tried to catch a Pokemon when your party was full and your current box at the time was full, the game just wouldn't let you catch a Pokemon. I typically prefer to select your mother's box. However, another issue with the Gen 1 storage system is that you can't even see a picture or description of the Pokemon in the box outside of its name or nickname. This just makes it more annoying to sort through your boxes, and if you were a dumb kid like I was and just nicknamed every Pokemon random gibberish and then switched boxes all of the time, then you'd lose your Pokemon easily not knowing what these Pokemon were named after, and I did that with my Charizard as a kid and I couldn't find it and I was really upset. Now, seeing as there were only 151 Pokemon to obtain and no shinies or other forms in Generation 1, having enough space for 240 Pokemon on the cartridge was plenty. I completed a Professor Oak's challenge in Pokemon Yellow version where I even caught every Pokemon possible in Yellow version and still had about half of the PC storage left to utilize. There's also this option to print your box, and I have no idea what that means since nobody ever used the Game Boy printer growing up. I remember the Gen 1 and 2 games would ask about printers here and there, and I'd try hooking up my Game Boy to a real physical printer, which obviously didn't work, but like, how the heck was I supposed to know that there was a dedicated printer for the Game Boy? I mean, to be fair, the Game Boy did have a lot of weird add-ons like a camera and a fishing sonar kit, so a printer doesn't sound that strange after all. Then for other functions of the Gen 1 PC that don't involve Pokemon storage, there's item storage, which was very useful since the Generation 1 Pokemon games, your bag space on your player was very limited, so you were forced to deposit excess items in the PC all the time. And look, I'm not going to get into the logistics of like storing a whole limited into a PC, let alone a full breathing Pokemon, but item storage in the PC would eventually go away in Pokemon games since the bag would later become infinite, making PC storage obsolete. You could even call Professor Oak from the PC like in the anime and have him evaluate your Pokedex, but then there's the Hall of Fame where you can see your teams that you used to beat the Elite Four, and that's basically it for Generation 1 PCs, at least on the actual Game Boy. You see, since I too am also a relic from the 1900s, I have this ancient device called the Nintendo 64 to my right, which you probably can't see because it's out of frame. And no, the 64 does not stand for the year it was released. I'm not that old, I promise. You see, in the earlier generations of Pokemon, they like to release companion games to the main series games that allow you to get prizes and even store Pokemon in them, basically making Pokemon Stadium 1 a secondary PC that you could use. I barely used this feature as a kid since it really wasn't needed in Generation 1. I did have a prize Kabuto waited for me though when I was recording this part of the video for beating something in Pokemon Stadium, I guess. I don't remember what, but Pokemon Stadium is cool like that and can give you Pokemon like Kabuto, which you would never normally be able to get if you picked Omanyte. You probably have bigger problems if you pick Omanyte over Kabuto anyway, and as archaic and outdated as the PC system is in the cartridge games, the PC system on Pokemon Stadium is just as bad. Like, look, maybe I'm being dumb. Okay, I'm being dumb, but using this PC system was like trying to place an order on the Taco Bell app on your phone while wearing boxing gloves. And look, don't ask me how I know that, but unfunny YouTuber jokes aside, what in the distortion world am I looking at here? I don't know why this is all text and barely any pictures. Like, what kind of operation are you running here, Professor Oak? You can view all your Pokemon stats here in a list at least, and even send a box from your cartridge to be stored into Stadium, which I tried. So for all I know, these Pokemon might be lost in Stadium forever because I have serious doubts that Stadium will save them properly after like 30 years. I did manage to find one option to view my Pokemon in 3D, and you can even reorder a Pokemon's moves here if you wanted to. So Pokemon Stadium 1, thank you for the Kabuto and overall being an awesome game, but your PC storage system sucks, and it sucks in Generation 1 as a whole, so no surprise here, but Gen 1, like, you're going in F tier. I can't even see the Pokemon's pictures. Now let's move on to my sweet child, Generation 2. You know, I've been really into Generation 2 lately, and if a Gen 1 fan is called a Gen 1er, then call me a Johto. I'm sorry I said that. This time I actually played Crystal through Stadium 2, which is some Inception level gameplay. Although, when I do this, it stops to load like every 30 seconds. I don't know why it does that. The PC in Johto is also made by Bill, like in Generation 1, but for Generation 2, the PC system is very similar to Generation 1. This time you have 2 more boxes totaling for 14, which can hold 20 Pokemon each for 280 total slots. That's only 29 more slots than there are Pokemon in Generation 2, which seems kinda low, and strangely the Japanese versions actually have 10 less total slots because they have 9 boxes which can hold 30 Pokemon each, working out to 270 total Pokemon. I don't know why they made the counts different, but at least this time you have a picture of the Pokemon in your box when you hover over their name, and I really like that. Overall, this interface is a bit cleaner, but unlike Generation 1, boxes that already have Pokemon in them don't have a Pokeball next to them anymore, which is kind of odd when you're switching boxes. Then for extra features, you can still store items in your PC like in Generation 1, and call Professor Oak so he can yell at you for not catching enough Pokemon. Then there's mail, and not email, it's just physical mail you somehow put into a computer. I still don't get it. I have this letter from Randy saying Dark Cave leads to another road. Thank you, Randy, for that valuable information. Then, of course, Generation 2 has a Nintendo 64 game it can link up to for more storage in Pokemon Stadium 2. Not to be confused with Pokemon Stadium 2 in Japan, which is Pokemon Stadium 1 in the rest of the world, but Pokemon Stadium 2, which was called Pokemon Stadium Gold and Silver in Japan. I know it's confusing, but hopefully you're still following. And loading up Pokemon Stadium 2. Okay, hold on. I have to save my game in the Pokemon Center. But okay, loading it up for real now, and it looks just like Stadium 1. You can see your mail on the N64 this time, though, which you couldn't do in Generation 1. I don't know why you would want to do that, but there's the mail again from Randy. There's also a section called Tame, which I'm pretty sure is supposed to be happiness. Cool that you could see it so easily, but like, why is it called Tame? Is this like a mistranslation or what? I also noticed some Pokemon glow for some reason, and I'm not sure why that is. Then for Japanese Pokemon Stadium 2, or rather Pokemon Stadium Gold and Silver, to get it to work on my American Nintendo 64, all I need to do is unscrew the back screw of a North American N64 back, so sorry Kobe, but I need the back of your game so I can screw it onto the back of my Japanese game to play it on my American N64. I don't think anybody in the history of the world has ever said that sentence before. And yeah, it's basically the exact same as the English games, and it wouldn't read my English Pokemon cartridge games. I don't know why I expected it to be different when Bulbapedia didn't say it was different, but I got a Japanese copy of Pokemon Stadium 2, and this is my excuse for showing it in a video, I guess. Sorry for wasting your time with that, but while I have you, why not click that like button? Do it now. I'm stuck in your computer talking about computers in a video game, so like, that's cool enough to click the like button and subscribe while you're at it. Also, check out the Patreon, link in the description. I have some cool bonus watch-along content over there. I think it's really fun. But to rank Generation 2's PC system, I need tape. Hold on. Generation 2's PC system is like barely better than Gen 1's. You have the pictures, which is like a big plus. It's going in D tier. Now for Generation 3, and things really open up here. First, look at this. The storage system in Ruby and Sapphire is just chef's kiss. I wrote out chef's kiss. Was I supposed to go? I mean, I wrote the script, so I should know the answer to that. Anyway, first, look at this. They completely revamped the boxes, and this would act as the base for Pokemon storage up until the modern day even. You don't have to save to switch boxes anymore, and if a box fills up while you're out catching Pokemon and you catch a new one, the game just puts that Pokemon in the next available box and lets you actually catch that Pokemon. You can move Pokemon way easier and see a small description of the Pokemon on the left even, because back in Gen 1 and 2, you couldn't move Pokemon in the modern sense. You literally had to withdraw them and then deposit them again. Then they just have extra flair like a background, then a box wallpaper you can change and unlock more throughout the game. I always liked this brick pattern one as a kid. I don't know why. Maybe because your mom has me bricked up. And now in Generation 3, every language game will have the same amount of storage with 14 boxes holding 30 Pokemon each, totaling for 420 Pokemon per game. With 386 Pokemon available in Generation 3, that's really not too much extra storage to have a full living deck, some shinies, and other sentimental Pokemon, and I guess most people wouldn't do all of that anyway, but if they did, they'd run into a problem. Then returning from Generation 2 is the mailbox, like seriously, who used this feature, and item storage, which isn't as needed in Ruby and Sapphire, as the bag is significantly bigger than it was in Generation 1 and Generation 2, but it's still kinda cool. The bag wasn't unlimited in Ruby and Sapphire, Sapphire just yet, but it's still good and very organized. Ruby and Sapphire doesn't have a Call the Professor option like the previous games did, and the Hall of Fame overall just looks much cleaner. Now for you hardcore Pokemon nerds who caught way too many Pokemon and ran out of space in Ruby or Sapphire, there was something you could do. See, if you lived near Manhattan at the time or had internet access, you could buy a Pokemon box for the GameCube. Strangely, it was only available at the Pokemon Center in Manhattan, now known as Nintendo World, or online, which is a big reason why it's one of the most expensive and rarest GameCube games to ever exist. Like, it's nearly $2,000 for a game that's just a bigger PC storage system for Ruby and Sapphire. It's not even like an actual game. Now, I'm not going to say I modded my Nintendo Wii and put a copy of Pokemon Box on it for this video since Nintendo could be watching, but I'm not going to say that I bought this game since the current price is outrageous, but I did want this game as a kid, but justifying spending $40 on a game I could only buy online that was barely even a game just didn't make a lot of sense and was very difficult to explain to my parents. Now, compatibility with Pokemon Box varies by region and it's confusing as heck, but it was designed specifically for Ruby and Sapphire. We have a familiar face here in Bridger who returns much later on for Pokemon Bank, and then we can hold a whopping 1,500 Pokemon. The game even gives you some bonus eggs and Pokemon. You can showcase your Pokemon and even play Ruby and Sapphire through the game by hooking up your Game Boy Advance with a special cable. I'm not sure if you need an original Game Boy Advance or if the SP works, but the images showed an OG GBA, and I tried it, but it didn't work to play the game, but it worked to access my boxes at least, which is like the main point of the game anyway. And as a kid, I thought Pokemon Box was kind of lame, but as an adult who has 2 GameCubes and played Ruby and Sapphire at the same time to complete the Pokedex and trade Pokemon back and forth, Pokemon Box is like the coolest thing ever. I want to talk about the other Generation 3 games before ranking them though. So as for Emerald, the PC box is basically the exact same as Ruby and Sapphire. Then in Fire Red and Leaf Green, it looks slightly different. You can call Professor Oak again, which you couldn't do in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. I think eventually the Switch versions of Fire Red and Leaf Green will also work with Pokemon Home, which is cool for the PC storage system for Fire Red and Leaf Green, but for native Generation 3, which is what this video is about, Pokemon Box does work with Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald with limited compatibility, and Pokemon Box being a giant PC system, really helpful, honestly. Great on you, Nintendo, for making that, although honestly, a bit too expensive and a bit too hard to get at the time. But as for the PC system in Gen 3 as a whole, it's pretty good and set the standard. It's not perfect and would see major upgrades and revisions throughout the years, but honestly, I'd rate this in like low B or high C orange even. We'll put it like right here and see. Way better than the original Game Boy era, and I guess technically I should mention Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness here too, because you could technically store Pokemon there if you trade them over, but the boxes are so small and you'll do it in the post game, and it's just not a good way of storing Pokemon, so it should like barely even count. Alright, Generation 4. This time we have some slight differences between the Gen 4 games, but starting with Diamond and Pearl, we have a max of 18 boxes with 30 Pokemon each, totaling for 540 total Pokemon. Only 47 more slots than Pokemon, as there were only 493, which really isn't a lot of extra slots, especially when considered the fact that there's like Pokeradar training, which requires you to catch a ton of Pokemon in a row, usually at least 30. Having to release all those Pokemon all the time with having such low box space is a problem, and yes, it's an issue that I ran into myself in Pokemon Pearl, as crazy as it sounds. The storage system looks similar to Generation 3, and since we have a touchscreen on the bottom, there's some settings you could touch, which is kind of cool to shift through some menus. I think it would have made a lot more sense to have the actual Pokemon box on the touchscreen so you can like touch the actual Pokemon, but other than that, you have your typical PC stuff. You can call Professor Oak. Mail is back for some reason. You have those ball capsules now so you can spell out funny words. I can only spell fire. I don't have many capsules, sorry. And still, no search option for the box. There's nearly 500 Pokemon and we still can't search. This would help a lot, and it's a feature I use all the time in modern Pokemon games, but you just gotta sort through every box by just looking for a certain Pokemon and straining your eyes till you see the actual sprite, which is rather tedious, but hey, at least we have the compare feature to look at 2 Pokemon stats side by side. I guess maybe for like IV or EV checking this is good, but for most people, like this is a worthless feature. I didn't even know this existed until I started making this video, and I have like hundreds of hours in every Generation 4 game. I know I'm being kind of harsh here, but the Gen 4 PC in Diamond and Pearl is actually fine. You might notice I have a metric stack attack a ton of Ponytas from that Poke Radar thing I mentioned earlier, but there's something we can actually do about that, and it's the main reason why I have to split up Gen 4's PC between Diamond and Pearl and then Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Let's go whip my Wii out again for the third time, once for Pokemon Box, one for your mother last night, and now for my Pokemon Ranch. Probably the weirdest Pokemon storage companion game yet, if you can even call it a game, although you can't really call Pokemon Box a game either. Now, my Pokemon Ranch was a download-only title on the Wii, making it way easier to get than Pokemon Box. It was also a lot cheaper at about $10 compared to $30 or more, which Pokemon Box or Pokemon Stadium would have costed at the time. In Japan, there was an update to my Pokemon Ranch so that it could work for Pokemon Platinum, but for us silly Americans and Europeans and everywhere else in the world, I guess, there's no way to make it work with Platinum version without modding, so we're kind of out of luck here, but luckily my Platinum versions are stuck shot-anting for Shinx, and yes, I know I have 3 copies of Platinum, they're all going for Shinx, and I know it's been months, but I'll get it one day. Now, I've messed around with my Pokemon Ranch before for other videos, and every time I load it up, I go, huh, was it always this weird? There's upwards to 1,000 Pokemon slots in my Pokemon Ranch you could use to send from your DS wirelessly, which is also really cool. This is why there's a ton of Ponytas in my ranch, not because they're horses and that would fit in a ranch, because again, it's from the Radar where I spent like 9 hours Radar trading for a Ponyta. There are some bonuses you could get in my Pokemon Ranch, and it's pretty cool overall, but as a kid, I actually never messed around with it too much and even have the game, because why would I spend $10 for a game that's basically just a PC storage system when I could have just spent $10 on Super Mario 64 on the Wii instead? And yeah, that's the first time I played Super Mario 64. Kind of weird to play it on a Wii when I had an N64. It's right there. I guess it is cool to see your Pokemon in 3D on my Pokemon Ranch and these models that look like Pokemon Rumble models, which actually predate Pokemon Rumble, funny enough. It's a cool and cheaper companion game, but I don't have too much to say about it, and I can say the same about Pokemon Platinum because the PC box in Platinum is the same as Diamond and Pearl, except you just can't use Ranch unless you trade that Pokemon over to Diamond and Pearl first, which was still required to release a Pokemon anyway, so it's not really a good idea to do that. Now, as for Heart Gold and Soul Silver, I'd say that these are slight upgrades to Diamond and Pearl and Platinum's PC, and it's really slight. Like, I'm only going to put Heart Gold and Soul Silver one space above Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum when we rank them, although I guess technically Platinum would be the worst of them. This time, the Pokemon appear on the bottom screen, which means you can touch them and move them around, and like, how did they not think of this sooner? Before getting to the actual storage part of the PC, though, I want to show off the photo album. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, a photographer can appear in special areas throughout the game and take a picture of you and your team. I found this one photo from July 25th, 2010 with me and my Pokemon, which included a shiny Magikarp named PaPaSea. Now, if you're still watching Nintendo, please close your ears, I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure that this Magikarp was hacked since I used to have an action replay that I got that same summer, and I used it so much, the plastic actually overheated and melted a little bit, but I'm pretty sure this is the first instance of me ever using the PaPaSea name, and it all started with a golden fish, and led to me standing here with a whiteboard and a Burger King crown. There was also this picture on March 15th, 2010, which is the day after the game came out in North America, and I already had the red Gyarados by then. Overall, the storage system in Heart Gold and Soul Silver is just a slight upgrade with a cool extra feature with photos, so I'll rank them both in B tier, although now that I'm actually recording the script, you don't have access to my Pokemon Ranch in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, so even though the PC system itself is better Heart Gold and Soul Silver, you kind of have no extra storage, so I guess I'll just rank them all like the same, but put Platinum one below it. This might be a bit hard to see because I'm using Japanese copies, but at the top of V tier, we have Diamond, mainly because you have access to my Pokemon Ranch. Then after that, we have Heart Gold and Soul Silver because you don't have access to my Pokemon Ranch, making it slightly worse than Diamond and Pearl overall, but it's better than Platinum because I like the way you can like touch the Pokemon move around, which you can't do in Platinum. And Platinum also don't have access to my Pokemon Ranch unless you live in Japan or if you mod your Wii. I'm now just realizing I'm showing a Japanese copy of Platinum, and I could probably just get the Japanese version of my Pokemon Ranch to make it work, but I've spent way too much time on this. This is what I have to say for the Gen 4 games, okay? Then to round out the Nintendo DS era, we start off Generation 5 with Pokemon Black and White. They're a bit different than Black and White 2 in terms of the storage, and for the first time, the Gen 5 games have no storage companion game or service at all, so you're really limited to the max of 24 boxes, which can hold only 720 Pokemon max. And it's enough for every Pokemon in the game, but with no extra storage, it can get full really quickly if you're doing like a living dex or want one of every Pokemon in the PC. Overall, it's pretty much the exact same thing as Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Nothing really new or special is added to the PC system in Black and White 1, so I guess I'll also put it in B tier, like above Platinum and next to Heart Gold Soul Silver. All right, going back to English games for this, I'll put you right there. Sorry for the mess. If you're new here, the whiteboard's always messy. And then strangely, everything kind of changed with Black 2 and White 2. Arguably the most underappreciated Pokemon games in this series, and they did a lot for the PC storage system. Okay, I know I've been saying this for so many Pokemon games, but I really want to replay Black 2 and White 2 and make a video like I did with Crystal version with that hour-long video. I'm currently working on a video like that for Pokemon Sun and Moon, but first, back to the PC and Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. Here we have the typical stuff like records for the Hall of Fame, a help option, an option to call the professor, then your PC, which just like in the first games is just showing your mail, and that's it. Thanks, I guess, Bianca, for letting me know this. But in terms of the actual PC storage, check this out. Yup, you can pick up multiple Pokemon and move them all together. Amazing feature for organization, and on top of that, look, finally, a search option. I mean, it's a crappy search option, it's really limited, you can't type out a full Pokemon's name or nickname even, and if there's no results for your search, it'll just gray out every single Pokemon and not tell you there was no Pokemon found, but hey, it's still a search option. You can customize your wallpapers and box names, you can have a battle box now, so you can have your in-game party to fly or surf around, and then your battle team ready to do some like battle subway or Wi-Fi battles or whatever. And the only thing holding back Black 2 and White 2 from being in the S tier is no companion game. This is the only generation where you can store your Pokemon elsewhere, and because that would affect people going for a living dex more than any other generation, I have to knock it down to the A tier. Sorry, Black 2, White 2, you're S tier in like every other aspect, but for the PC, why couldn't they like make Pokemon Bank a generation sooner? Now for Generation 6. I know Pokemon X and Y aren't the most loved Pokemon games, but the Generation 6 PC system is actually pretty amazing. It's the exact same with Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and it's made by Arceus. You know, there's a few different PC people in the Pokemon games, like Bill from Gen 1 and 2 and Lynette later on, and I had no idea who Arceus was or what he looked like, so I had to look it up, and Bill apparently asked this guy to maintain the PC storage system in Kalos, and like, sorry Bill, but you were outplayed by this punk rocker guy in every way, because his PC storage system is way better than anything you ever made. You can see your party on screen and just so much organization options. This is the PC storage system I use the most since I played the Gen 6 Pokemon games way too much with online Wi-Fi battles, so much so that I ran out of room in my boxes on my main copy of Omega Ruby and started playing Alpha Sapphire just for more space. I was too cheap to get Pokemon Bank, which would allow me for more storage space, but more on that later. The Generation 6 games had a max of 31 boxes holding 30 Pokemon each, totaling for 930 Pokemon. About 200 more than Pokemon that existed at the time, which really isn't that bad, especially compared to the last couple of generations. There was this weird folder option to view boxes that I never really liked, and a search option that's basically the same as it was in Black 2 and White 2, except now I can search for Pokemon who can learn certain TMs. Did you guys know that Vespiquen can learn Venoshock? Well, now you do, because I searched for it. This PC has the return of photos like we saw in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, with this photo of me on a Lapras from October 20th, 2013, one day after I beat the game, because I remember beating it exactly a week after it came out, and it came out October 12th, and I don't know why I remember all of these niche aspects about Pokemon games. And then of course we have Pokemon Bank, which is basically Pokemon Box but for the 3DS. This time it's a yearly subscription fee, or at least it was until it became free in 2023, roughly 10 years after its initial launch. And it's also still supported 13 years later after its initial launch. I do have question mark 30 days left of my subscription, which hopefully should last me a little while. We see Bridget here, again, the same person from Pokemon Box back on the GameCube, and excuse the camera footage here because my Pokemon Bank is actually tied to my original 3DS I got at launch in 2011, and not my fancy new Sun and Moon Edition new 3DS XL with the capture card installed, so I kinda have to use a camera here. You can sort up to 3,000 Pokemon to Pokemon Bank, and it was later updated to work with the Generation 7 games, and eventually in Generation 8 to move Pokemon into Pokemon Home. This is still a crucial piece of Pokemon software for people who play the older games like me, and seeing as Pokemon Bank is free now, this is the best and most expansive storage we have had in Pokemon. Honestly, all of the Gen 6 games basically have the same PC storage system, and they all go in S tier because they are by far the best. Near infinite storage, a search option, the Pokemon have cute 3D models. It's the best. You know what, Gen 6, your PC is so good, you get the whole Japanese cartridge for the whiteboard, if I can actually fit it. As for Generation 7, the PCs are the exact same in Sun and Moon as well as the Ultra games, and this time, interacting with the PC in the Pokemon Center just automatically opens up the Pokemon storage boxes. Straight to the point, no like calling the professor or any other shenanigans. It's pretty much the exact same as Gen 6 with a slight UI change. It has the same access to bank as Generation 6, and the same janky search, and even compared to newer games, I'd still say that Gen 7 boxes are one of the best, and still worth the S tier. I will put it slightly below X and Y and Omega Alpha Sapphire as a whole, because you do have more Pokemon and less storage in the main game, but it's really not that bad because, again, Pokemon Bank is free now. And you know what? I'm noticing a theme with my videos where 3DS games tend to rank pretty highly in these videos. Now we can finally move on to the Nintendo Switch with the Let's Go games, and what is this? So the storage system in the Let's Go games isn't really a PC anymore, and you could just access it from anywhere in the game, and it's just one giant box with 1,000 slots. Why? I guess they tried to make it more like Pokemon Go, but Pokemon Go at least has more robust search options and tags, which are basically boxes, but in Let's Go, this is just a mess. You can search, and there's only like 153 Pokemon if you include Melton and Melmetal in it or something like that, but this still sucks. Pokemon Home compatibility is limited with the Let's Go games because of how the mechanics work in Let's Go versus other traditional games like the Gen 7 games and Sword and Shield after it. And this means if you put a Pokemon from the Let's Go games into Pokemon Home, then say Sword and Shield, it then cannot go back to Let's Go, which is kinda dumb. Honestly, initially I wrote D tier, but if Gen 2 is D tier, this is F tier. This is my least favorite box. I know it's a small Switch cartridge and you can barely see it, but there is an Eevee on there. Now, as for Pokemon Home, it didn't release until 2020, which might be why it's janky with the Let's Go games, which released in 2018. But for now, let's move on to the real first Switch Pokemon game, Pokemon Sword and Shield. There isn't really a PC system in this game, and everything is done through Rotom, and you can access the PC storage from anywhere, just like in the Let's Go games. And to kind of make sense, like back in Generation 1 days, cell phones didn't even have a screen. Then come 2019 when Sword and Shield came out, basically everybody got sucked into their phones through Instagram, Twitter, or random mobile game, YouTube, or whatever, and pretty much replaced their computer with a phone. There's so many people I know who don't even own a computer and just have their phone. This time there's 32 boxes totaling for 960 Pokemon, although not every Pokemon is programmed in Sword and Shield, which is like a whole other topic, but in terms of storage size and the amount of Pokemon accessible in the game, it's really not that bad. And like, maybe I'm complaining for the sake of complaining, but I'm not a fan of being able to access your PC from anywhere in the game. Yes, it makes things easier, it is a quality of life enhancement, which I do generally prefer, but I'm so used to being stuck with only 6 Pokemon in my party until I reach the PC, even if I caught new Pokemon. I feel like what they should do instead is have more PCs outside of Pokemon centers and instead allow you to add a Pokemon to your party right after you catch one if your party is full, instead of just sending it to the PC right away. Again, this is an old man yells at cloud situation, but for the pros, if you search in your boxes, you see a cute little sprite now, and I kind of like that. Then for downsides, there's no customization and no more cute box wallpapers like in the past. I mean, this works, and you have Pokemon Home, which you have to pay like 15 bucks a year for, and I think the free option only gives like 1 box, and like, that's cool, but it's not a lot. Maybe one day they'll just make it all free like they did with Pokemon Bank, but honestly, there's a realistic future where both Home and Bank just get cut off, and then you just like can't transfer out Pokemon anymore or store Pokemon anymore, which like kind of scares me as somebody who has played an obscene amount of Pokemon since Generation 1. I do think it's pretty cool though, you could access any game in Pokemon Home without the actual cartridge being in the console, but because the search option still kind of sucks and the customization is just gone, I'm gonna put Sword and Shield in low A tier. Like, for me, it works, but like, where's the charm? Where's the whimsy? That's what I'm all about. I guess I'll just put you like that. That works, I guess. Then we have Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, where things get weird. Again, I mean, this whole video is pretty weird, but Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were the first remake Pokemon games that didn't allow for any new Pokemon since the original games came out to be in the game. That means there are only 493 possible Pokemon in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, but the PC in the game itself has 1,200 slots, way more than the original Diamond and Pearl game. Why so many? You could have 2 living dexes with a lot of extra space in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl left over, and that's with without even using Pokemon Home at all. These games also go back to the regular PC system in the Pokemon Center. You can search and see your Pokemon sprites, and it's just an enhanced version of the Gen 4 boxes with way more storage native onto the game and with Pokemon Home support. It has a similar issue to the Let's Go games though, where it has some limitations with Pokemon Home and you can't transfer every Pokemon in and out of it, but honestly, it's still pretty good. It actually feels more like the 3DS system of boxes, and because of that and the fat storage space, it's gonna rank highly. This might be controversial because Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. People love to hate on them, even if they did do something right in the PC storage system, and it's one of the best PC storage systems ever. Like, if people want to get mad at me for putting Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl in S tier in the context of the Pokemon boxes, they can get mad at me because they just weren't paying attention to the video, I guess. So comment down below your favorite ice cream topping if you're still watching the video and paying attention. Mine, honestly, brownies. And I know the Switch games have a lot of good PC systems, but also has some duds like in Pokemon Legends Arceus. And look, I get it. Pokemon Legends Arceus takes place in the past and there's no PCs invented yet, and the only form of technology is your phone, which somehow time traveled with you. So now instead of having regular PC boxes, you have literal pastures for your Pokemon to roam around in. Like, it's a physical place you need to go to in the Jubilee Village to see your Pokemon, and you have up to 960 slots, which is a lot, but the game does revolve around catching a lot of Pokemon. I mean, you need to catch like 50 Bidoofs just to beat the game. Like, why does anybody need 50 Bidoofs? I guess it does make more sense because, like, you know, in other games, catch Pokemon and just like, you know, throw it in a computer. In this game, you actually have them in a pasture, which makes a lot of sense, but on the same coin, you could have 960. How do you have that much space for that much Pokemon in a pasture that looks like this big? The pastures operate similar to the boxes from Sword and Shield though. There's no customization. You can search and sort Pokemon pretty easily and send stuff to Pokemon Home with some limitations like the Let's Go games and Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. But if I can have an ARC phone, why can't I just access pastures from the ARC phone? I know I just said I don't like having access to the PC at all times when I was talking about Pokemon Sword and Shield, but since the whole point of Legends Arceus is to catch a ton of Pokemon, and because going all the way back to the Jubilee Village to get to the pastures is a pain, I can excuse it if in Pokemon Legends Arceus, they allowed you to access the PC from anywhere in the game, which would have just been a lot easier. I don't like it as much in a more traditional style game like Sword and Shield, and I know I'm kind of contradicting myself here, but like, I'm a YouTuber, get used to it. I do want to give Legends Arceus some props for having a mass release option, which is great for how the gameplay works, but honestly, I'm just sticking this in C tier. This PC storage system, like, really isn't great. I guess you can go like that. That's C tier. As for Scarlet and Violet, wow, look at that. It's basically the same as Sword and Shield again, but with a blue background instead of a white background. I do like this search a bit better though, since you can see on the right here, the Pokeball will be red if the Pokemon you're searching for is in that box, which makes it a bit easier. You can also quickly tap the face buttons to swap organization modes to either quickly select a Pokemon or mass select Pokemon, which is easier. And while the game can only hold 960 Pokemon, which is less than the total amount of Pokemon that are currently in Pokemon, because not all Pokemon are present in Scarlet and Violet, you could still fulfill a living dex of the existing Pokemon at the very least. I do feel like I tend to catch more Pokemon in the wild in Scarlet and Violet though, since you can see them in the overworld and throwing a Pokeball is pretty easy, so a bit more storage would have actually been nice. If BDSP could have 1200 slots, I don't see why this game couldn't have more. I guess I'll put it in B tier with Sword and Shield since it's just kind of the same. But finally, the last game in the series so far, Pokemon Legends EA. Another Legends game, although catching Pokemon isn't as much of a priority in this game like it was in the last Legends games, where you had to literally catch God. The boxes in Legends EA also cap at 960 total Pokemon, which isn't great, and you can access the PC from anywhere, which kind of makes sense since the game takes place in just one giant city. The search function still kind of sucks and is basically the exact same as it's been since 2012 with Black 2 and White 2, but it does everything else you need, can hold every Pokemon in the game, and if you have Pokemon Home, it expands the storage, so I guess it's B tier. So that's the PC storage in every Pokemon game. You would expect it to just get better with each new release, but that's not really the case, and I'm looking at you, Let's Go, for totally dropping the ball. But kudos to the Generation 6 and 7 games for doing everything right as always. So yeah, leave a like. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. Actually, I am asking. It does help a lot. I would appreciate it. Subscribe. Shout out to all my cool Patreon supporters on screen here. I guess I'll give you one last view of the overall tier list. And bye. See you later. I'm leaving. Never coming back again. Found someone who does it better than you can.